So recently I showed a tool that I made for my Neovim configuration that gives me a cool little to-do buffer that I can just open up from anywhere in my desktop. So if I press space TD, I get this little file here and I can just write any of my to-do stuff in here. So I can just say like, make a YouTube video, and I can write to it, and then I can quit out. And then let's just say like I am in a random spot on my desktop, I open it up and I press space TD and it's right there. So I have this one little quick buffer that I can just write random content to. And I got a ton of requests of people asking me how to implement this, and it was actually a pretty easy thing to do. And so today I thought I would show you how I made this and just give you a step-by-step process to build this for your own configuration. But the goal for this video is not only to make this, but to also show you how you can extend your own Neovim configuration and make your own plugins. So we're going to be going over a little bit of that as well. So before we get started, I'm going to make sure my Neovim is completely stock so that you're not confused about what I'm doing. So I'm just going to move my Neovim configuration to just Neovim archive here, I guess. And then I will make sure that all those things are symling properly. And then if I open up this up here, as you can see, we have completely stock Neovim here. And so now that my thing is cleared, we have to actually make the Neovim configuration. So in order to do that, we need to first create the Neovim directory here, which you probably already have done. So I'm just going to go to the spot where the Neovim configuration exists, which for me is home.files.config. For you, it's probably home.config Neovim. So yeah, make your nvim here and cd into nvim there. And then let's just open up an init.lua file and let's just put print hello Neovim here, just to make sure that everything is working. Okay, we get a little hello Neovim, so it looks like our configuration is, working properly here. So I guess the first step is to get the directory structure down. So by default, Neovim is going to look in a couple spots inside of your configuration. It's going to look in the init.lua, which is at the root of your Neovim configuration. And it's also going to look in a special directory called lua. So we're going to just create that directory here. So I'm just going to do make dir lua, and now you can see that I have an init.lua and a lua directory here. Inside of this lua directory, I'm also going to create a new one, and this is just going to be my plugin. So I'm just going to call mine like to-do float. Why not? So we have that there, and then I'm going to go inside of to-do float, and then inside of here, I'm going to create my init.lua. This is like the launched file for our plugin here. So I'll just create this init.lua, and let's just say like print hello from to-do float.lua, right, and quit that. And then let's just go back to our Neovim directory here, and let's open up that init.lua here. So instead of doing hello Neovim here, instead let's do require to-do float to see if this is all working properly here. So now if I reopen Neovim, you should see that we have a hello from to-do float.lua. And just for a recap here, this is the directory structure that we have. So let's go ahead and open up Neovim and let's navigate to that to-do float init.lua file here. So inside of our file here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local capital M equals a table here. And this is sort of like a module. So this is like our to-do float module. And so to actually give the user access to this, so if we want to have any sort of public facing functions and stuff, we would then want to return the M at the end. So now let's go ahead and actually add some functionality here. So to do that, what we probably want to do is have some sort of setup function, because if you've ever used any Neovim plugins of any kind, they usually have a system where, you load them into your configuration and then you say like require the name of the plugin dot setup. So why don't we just do that? Even though it's in our own project, we can still sort of follow that convention to keep things consistent. So I'll say m.setup equals a function here, and just say end like this. And inside of this setup function, we're going to call a couple functions that we're going to set up in the future. And so the function we're going to write here, I'm just going to call it like setup user commands. Why not? So we're going to call this function called setup user commands, which means that we need to actually create one. So I'm just going to do local function setup user commands like this. And now we just need to, set up our user commands. And so the first thing we want to do is basically pick which file we're going to write to. In my own configuration, I have a hard-coded path to a specific file on my file system, and you can do this however you want. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this function take in options. And here I'm going to actually try to grab out a user-defined file path, and otherwise then it would default to some sort of hard-coded path. And so what I mean by that is I'll just like grab a local target file here, and this is going to be ops.target file. And if that is, nil, then we're going to just, look for a to-do.markdown in the current directory here. So now that we have grabbed a target file, we need to then create a user command, which will basically be a command that the user can run down in the Neovim command line here. So like whenever you write ex to go into netrw, it would then give the user a special command that they can run for this to-do file here. So I'm just going to do vim.api.nvim create user command, and I'm just going to call it some random thing like td, I guess, and this will take in a callback or a function here, and another argument here, which is like special arguments in a table. We're just going to ignore that for now. What we need to do here is actually create the logic inside of this function here. Now there is quite a bit of logic, especially if you want to style this pretty nicely. So I'm actually going to pull this into its own function here, and I'm going to call this function like open floating file. Why not? And this function is going to take in the path that we are going to be opening. So let's actually pass in that target file like this. And there we go. Now, of course, to use this open floating file, we actually have to define it. So we'll do local function open floating file like this. And this will take in a target file like this and the end of the function there. And let's actually get this functionality working. So paths are kind of complicated, especially when you're working with paths that involve environment variables. So for example, if we had a path like this, like notes to do.md, we want to make sure that this is actually resolved to the home directory so we're able to open it properly. Now, in order to do that, we need to have a little helper function that will expand our path to the full file path so that we can then open it without any issues. So I wrote a tiny little helper function that, at least works on the systems I work on. So let's go ahead and just paste that in here. It's a very simple helper function here. It just checks if the beginning of the string is this tilde. If it is, sub in the user's home environment variable value there, and then return the new path. So we're just going to be using that here. So we'll say local expanded path equals expand path, and then I'm going to pass in that target file here. Now that's great, but we still haven't checked if the file path is actually readable or not. So we'll say if vim.function.file readable, and then we just want to pass in this expanded path like this, equals 0. Then we want to do something. So I'll just say vim.notify, which gives the user a little notification in the bottom of their screen. And we'll just say, let's say file, say to do file does not exist at directory, and we'll do this, and then we'll do ... and pass in that expanded path so we can append it to the string message here. And then the second argument of vim.notify is the log level. So we're going to do vim.log.levels.error. Now it's at this point in the tutorial where I want to note that I do not have the entire Neovim API memorized, and you definitely don't need to know the entire Neovim API to be able to write plugins. The great thing about Neovim is it has built-in documentation that is really, really good. So I could do something like :h vim.notify here, and it will tell me everything about the vim.notify function and stuff like that. And if all else fails and you don't even know what to be like looking for help messages for, you can Google things and you'll have a ton of resources because the Neovim plugin community is massive. And so if the file does not exist, then we want to just return because we can't do anything if the file path that the user specifies does not exist. So now that we've ensured that the file does exist in this path, we then need to grab a buffer for this file here. So we'll do local buff equals vim.fn.buffnr and pass in that expanded path, and then pass in true for the second argument. True basically saying if this buffer doesn't exist, then create one and return its number here. And if you didn't know that, you can also do :h and then built in functions, and then you can just search for buffnr and it will tell you all about it right here. Now I'm a little paranoid, so I want to make sure that this buffer did actually open. So I'm going to say like if buff equals -1, that means that it didn't open correctly. Then I'm going to manually try to create a buffer, desperate attempts here. So I'll say buff equals vim.api.nvim create buff here. and then we'll just pass in false and false for these flags here. And then we're going to do a couple things here. So I'm going to just set the name of the buffer to just the path, because I don't know what else would I name it. So I'll do vim.api.nvim buff set name here, and then I'm going to specify the buffer, and then for the name I'm just going to do that expanded path like this. Now, something a little bit more technical here, but I'm going to be disabling the swap file. This is to avoid errors with, you open this to-do floating thing in one Neovim session, and then you open it in a second one, and it will just freak out. I just want to disable the swap file. It's not the end of the world if a little bit of my to-do thing is destroyed, because I'm only really adding like one line at a time. So I'm just going to do vim.bo, and this is a table here. So @buff.swapFile equals false. So now that we've gotten our buffer sorted, we now need to actually create a window to put this buffer into. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to keep my code organized, and I'm actually going to create a separate function for my window configuration here. So I'll say local function window configuration, and this will simply return a table with our different configuration options here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the width and the height of our window, and I'm just going to hard code them in because I want that. But you can of course provide options to the user to specify the width and the height. So I'm going to do local width equals math.min, and I'm just going to take the floor value of vim.o.columns here, and I'm going to multiply that by 0.8, so 80% of the screen, and then I'm going to grab 64 as the minimum that I want it to be at, and then grab the height here, which is going to be the math.floor of the vim.o.lines, so the amount of lines on the screen, and multiply that by 8 as well. Then inside of this table here, we're just going to return the width here, and then we're just going to return the height like that. Now we want to set a couple different options here. So relative is going to be equal to editor like this. We're also going to want a couple things here. So column, I'm just going to set these equal to 1 for now, but then I will show you how we can center this in a little bit. So then row is also going to equal to 1. So this will be like 1 row and 1 column down from the top left here. And then for the border, I'm going to put border equals single because I think that looks pretty nice. Okay, so now we have a very simple, window configuration. Let's actually open that window up. So I'll say local window equals vim.api.nvim open window, and I'm going to pass in that buffer, and then I'm going to pass in true, and then I'm going to pass in the configuration. So window configuration like this. And then that should be all that we need to get something up and running. Oh, what we do need to do is also make sure that our setup function now takes in options, and we pass them to the setup user commands. Oh, I also forgot to change something with the snippet here. So when I pasted in this expand path, remove the utils and make this a local function like this. And now what we need to do is go to our init.lua in the root of our Neovim configuration here. So go into this, and then let's just say like local to do float equals required to do float. And then we'll say to do float dot setup here, and then inside of the table here, let's say target file equals, and then I think mine is like notes to do.md or something like that. So then just save this and quit everything, and let's see what we did wrong. So I open up Neovim, no errors yet, so that's pretty cool, especially since I haven't, not used an LSP in so long. So let's open up TD, and let's see. We actually do have our user command here, the capital TD that we created. Let's actually press it, and as you can see, we have this cool floating window here, which is some pretty cool stuff. We can then close it with :Q, and we are done. I guess we can just do this here, and we can just test it out. So let's just go to like a random spot in our, file system, open it up here, and then do capital TD, and as you can see, it's still there. So let's try editing something. So my edit, and let's do :WQ here, quit out of this, let's go back to where we were, and let's try opening it up, and as you can see, it's working. So there you go. So if you're not a perfectionist, you're basically done with this video, but let's actually make this look a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead and perfect this a little bit. So I'm gonna go back to our little to-do float here, and we'll change a couple different things. So instead of having the column and the row hard-coded to this one here, let's actually make it so that we can have it always in the center. Now for that, we can just write a very simple function that I like to call center in. So I'm going to do local function center in, and then we'll just have outer inner here. This will center the inner item inside of the outer item. And the simple way to do that is to just return the outer minus the inner divided by 2. And so now in order to actually use this, we can just use center in like this. And then for the columns, that's the width. So we want to do vim.o.columns here and the width of our pop-up window. And then we can do center in here and do vim.o.lines and pass in the height. So let's go ahead and test out this quick change. So we'll do :td, and it's now in the center of our screen. So cool stuff. But something that I don't like is how tedious it is to actually close this. I have to do :q or :wq every time. This is supposed to be something that is very, very quick to open and close. So let's go ahead and fix that a little bit. I guess the first thing to do is just to add a quick key map, and I don't think this really belongs inside of the configuration, so I'm just going to put it in my init.lua itself. So I'm going to do vim.keymap.set, and this is going to be in normal mode, where I'm going to make mine leader td, and then I'm going to do :td and then carriage return like this, which is just enter, and then in the table I'm going to do silent equals true. And this should be all that I need. Oh, I almost forgot. I also have to do vim.g.mapLeader equals space to make sure that our leader key is actually space. We can open it up, do space td, and now we can actually open it up with just a simple command. We don't have to go in here and do capital TD like this every time. That gets rid of half of the friction, but now let's actually make it so that it's easy to close. Now this is a slight bit harder, but it's really not that hard at all. All we need to do is set up a little local key map. So to do that, let's go to the end of our function for creating and opening a window, and let's do vim.api.nvim buff set keymap, and then we'll pass in the buffer. And in normal mode, when we press Q with nothing else, then we want to do something about it. So for me, I want this to not remap anything, so no remap equals true. Silent, yes, I want it to be silent. I don't want any sort of pop-ups to be happening here. And then the actual thing that I want to happen will be in this callback here. So callback equals function. And here what we want to do is just quit out of this buffer if there's nothing else to save. So we'll say if vim.api.nvim get option value modified, and then we'll do buffer equals our current buffer. So if this is true, then what we want to do is we want to notify the user. So notify, save your changes, please. And I'll say vim.log.levels.warn here. Otherwise, we just want to close the window. So vim.api.nvim, I think it's win close, yeah. And then we want to pass in the window, which is the one that we're currently on. So it's just the 0, and I'll just pass in true here as well. And that is our entire callback. So now if we quit out of this and reopen Neovim here, I can do space TD. Oh, and I misspelled keymap, so let me just go ahead and change that real quick. So we want to do keymap. Let's try that again, space TD, Q, space TD, Q. Looks like everything is working as planned. And now we are kind of just done with everything. So there you go, that's the whole thing. Now I did say earlier in the video that I would be kind of showing you a little bit about how to make some simple plugins. And so I'm gonna go over briefly how you could actually turn this into a little plugin that you can then distribute and, show it to your friends and make them download it on their own systems. And so to do that, let's actually just do a little bit of file management here. So I'm just going to leave Neovim, and I'm going to open up Yazi, which you don't need this obviously to do this sort of thing. I'm just doing this because I'm lazy and I want to move around a ton of files quickly. So I'm just going to go into our Neovim configuration here, and I'm just going to cut out this entire to-do float thing that we just created, and I'm going to go to a random directory, I guess, and let's just create a new directory here. I'm just going to call this floating to-do.nvim like this. And then inside of here, I'm going to create a Lua directory. And then inside of there, I'm going to paste in this to-do float, and we're going to have a init.lua here. So the actual project is going to be called floating-todo.nvim. And then inside of there, we have that Lua directory. Inside of that, we have to-do float. And then inside of that, we have a init.lua. So now that our plugin is its own standalone plugin, it needs its own standalone Lua directory. Okay, and so from here, we just need to make this a Git repository, I guess. So I'll just do, git init. I'll just do git branch m main here, and let's actually just create a little repository here. So I'm just going to create a GitHub repository in the background. So once you've created a GitHub repository, you can then connect it. So git remote add origin, paste in that link there, and now it's connected. We can then just do a git add dot, git commit m iota, and then git push u origin main. And now we have our little repository in GitHub right here. So why did I do that? So the reason I did that is because most plugins are going to be installed through some sort of remote repository. So I wanted to show you how you would actually do it on your own. So now if we reopen up our configuration here, we're going to get some errors because, to-do flow is no longer in there. I cut it out and I put it in a new directory here. So let's actually open up our init.lua here, and let's get rid of all this stuff. And what we're going to do to actually install our own plugin is we're going to use Lazy.nvim because it's the easiest package manager. And let's actually figure out how we can get started. So I'm going to go to the documentation website. And let's see, I haven't actually done this in a while, so we'll see. It looks like I need to do this sort of stuff here. So I'm just going to blindly copy this entire thing. So I'll just copy this here and I will paste it here. And let's see if that works. I'm then just going to leave Neovim here, and Lazy.nvim is going to look in a specific directory for your plugins. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a directory here inside of Lua called plugins. So, and now if we look at the tree, we now have a Lua plugins. I will then open up Neovim here, and now let's just go ahead and create a new file here. So I'll do :e Lua plugins, and I'm just going to call this to-do float.lua. And then the way that Lazy expects this here is it expects every file inside of the plugins directory to return a table. So we'll return here. And then we want to put our GitHub username, and then the name of the repository. So I don't remember what I called mine actually. I called mine floating todo.nvim here. And then we'll make a config equals function. And here I will say require, what was it? Floating to do? No, it was called to do flow. Okay, this is terrible. Floating to do and to do flow, but require to do flow dot setup. And then for target file, I'm going to set it equal to tilde notes to do dot md like this. And there we go. We should be good to go with that. So let's go ahead and reopen this up, and we're cloning here. The clone actually worked, and it looks like everything worked. So let's see what happens if I do space td. Oh, right, I don't actually have that set up, but I can do :td, and yes, it does actually work. Great. So that's pretty cool stuff. And for some reason, my color scheme is now different. So interesting. And now what we can do is we can just, add an extra thing inside of our configuration so that we're able to add that little key map again. So I'll do to-do float.lua, and inside of this config, I'll just say vim.ok. And let's actually go into here and let's do space td, and look at that, we now have our cool thing here. So I can then say that yes, I did make a to-do plugin and I did make a YouTube video. So great, I guess this is my done pile. So with that being said, that about concludes the video for today. We built a pretty decent little plugin that we can now distribute to our friends and have this cool little pop-up to do thing for our own setup. Hopefully this video was informative, and hopefully it encourages you to make your own plugins that you can then use to improve your own setup and possibly improve other people's setups. The code that we wrote in this video is linked in the description, as well as a link to my own configuration, but warning, it is my configuration, so it's pretty sloppy and I'm not accepting pull requests anytime soon. But with that being said, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this type of content, and if you like configuring your editor and you like, possibly even game development, which is another thing that I like to talk about on this channel, consider liking and subscribing, and also consider joining my Discord if you want to talk to other like-minded individuals. And then also, finally, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue making videos like this. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. See ya.